Please stand as you are able. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Ruffin?
Here.
Mr. Trapp?
Here.
Mr. Scala?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Pitzer?
Here.
Ms. Peters?
Here.
Mr. Treese?
Present. I would like to welcome you to the February 5th meeting of the Columbia City Council. As you can tell, we have a fairly lengthy agenda tonight with a lot of public interest, and I would like to ask for your all's cooperation in helping us move through the agenda quickly. I know a lot of you are here for a number of topics, and I would suggest we go to public hearing 3-18, but Madam Clerk, could you read that in tandem with Bill 27-18 and Bill 28-18?
Public hearing 318 is the proposed construction of the Shepherd to Rollins Trail Project, Trail Alignments 1 and 3. Council Bill 2718 is an ordinance determining it is in the public interest to construct the Shepherd to Rollins Trail Project, Trail Alignments 1 and 3, approving and adopting plans and specifications, determining that the work shall be done by contract, calling for bids through the purchasing division, providing for payment for the improvements, authorizing the city manager to obtain, execute, and record all documents necessary for the improvements, providing for compliance with the prevailing wage law and state-mandated construction safety training, and fixing the time when this ordinance shall become effective. Second reading. Council Bill 2818 is an ordinance declaring the need to acquire certain interest in real property for construction of the Shepherd to Rollins Trail Project, Trail Alignments 1 and 3, authorizing acquisition by negotiation or, if necessary, by condemnation, authorizing the city manager to obtain and execute all instruments necessary for acquisition of such land, and fixing the time when this ordinance shall become effective. Second reading.
I believe someone might be leaning on the light switch in the back of the room. And again, I would encourage you to please keep those doors clear and use the overflow room. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Anderson.
The Shepherd to Rollins Trail, let me start again. The Shepherd to Rollins Trail Project Alignment 1 is a non-motorized transportation pilot program get-about project to be completed using Round 2 grant funds. Trail Alignment number 3 will be completed using park sales tax funds. This project will provide an important connection between the university and neighbors to the east. Alignment 1 is an east-west trail connection beginning at Rollins Street, taking a southerly route through the MU veterinary facility, then crossing the Hinkson Creek with a bridge and ending at the south end of Bluffdale Drive cul-de-sac. Alignment 3 is a north-south trail connection that will tie to Alignment 1 near the bridge on the north side and will generally run south to tie to the Hinkson Creek Trail at Stadium and Old Highway 63 intersection. The proposed trail is designed to meet accessibility guidelines for pedestrian facilities and public right-of-way or PRORAG requirements. As part of the trail design, permanent trail easements and temporary construction easements will need to be required for construction and continued maintenance of the trail. Trail alignment number 1 and number 3 will be bid and constructed in conjunction with one another. Construction is planned to begin during the fall of 2018. The FHWA Missouri Division, based on the response from their HQ Office of Civil Rights, concurs that the design meets the requirements for reasonable accessibility for persons with disabilities under ADA. The project as described in the approved NEPA document is approved by FHWA as stands. In the fall of 2014, Trans-Systems completed a mode shift study for this project. The trail study considered mode shift from vehicles to bicycles because the proposed alignments were too long for any meaningful mode shift from walking. Therefore, to meet the objective of the federal pilot program, bicycle mode shift became the determining factor for designing the routes. On January 26, 2015, the initial IP meeting was held. On March 16, 2015, the initial public hearing was held. During the spring and summer of 2016, the city had various discussions with the university about the trail alignment through their property. Our consultant that's working on the design is also here to answer questions, and with that, Mr. Griggs will talk a little bit more.
All right, this trail has been on the Parks and Recreation Trails Master Plan that appeared in 2005. We revised it again in 2007, again in 10, and then it's in our most recent Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Master Plan in 2013. As you can tell, it's part of a loop. When you look at a trail individually, it's hard. So imagine a road being built with a gap, and that's what this is. This helps fill in that gap that would help complete this whole east leg of our 30-mile loop around Columbia. This would connect significantly a large number of population on the entire Hinkson Valley Greenway. It's almost a 17-mile backbone of the trail. It would help tie in MKT Trail from the Katy, ties in the MU Rec Trail, the Hinkson Creek Trail, and the Hominy Branch Trail. A lot of times we hear about, well, you're going to tear up the environment, you're going to do some damage. We're going to try to follow the existing sewer easement as much as possible for the trail. In the 1950s, a large sewer line was built across the property. This path will really serve as a kind of our trail route. It allows us to avoid many of the mature trees. It's land that's been impacted already by the sewer construction, and it allows us to go in and help restore the riparian greenway to help improve stormwater quality. When you look at a sewer project, this isn't just a simple trenching and put it in. It's a massive amount of work. As council remembers what happened at Flat Branch when they did the Flat Branch sewer project down from Providence Road or Stewart Road along there. It really did a lot of damage, but then we were able to come in and restore it. You can see where the sewer lines are there, and you can kind of see how a lot of the sewer, you have a sewer line and a gas line. A lot of our existing trail will run around some of that. These are just some of the photos of the site. The bridge construction, the Parks and Recreation, the project is our total budget is $800,000. We anticipate the bridges will be anywhere, hopefully around $250,000 to $300,000 each. That leaves us money to build the trail itself. We will do the restoration part of the trail, and if the funds are short, we will come in with our own crews. You look down here in the bottom, you can see where we built the Scotch Branch Trail, where we navigated it through trees. Our goal is with any of our trail projects or even our park projects, we're a minimum of a 2-for-1. For every 1 6-inch or larger tree that comes out, we replant with 2. And so that's our plans. That's what we've done on the Grindstone Creek Trail, and it's been very successful on that project as well. And you can see how over time, nature abhors a vacuum. Nature will fill in behind us. Unfortunately, it may fill in with honeysuckle, but we hope we could do some native planting and get that headed off before that would happen. But trails are an important part of Columbia. Why this keeps coming up is because we hear about it. In our recent 2015 Parks and Recreation City Survey that was sent out by ETC Institute, 82% of Columbians use a trail. So they felt that it was a major important factor of us. Following the public hearing, staff is requesting council approval for construction, acquisition of the necessary easements, and authorization of a bid call through the city's purchasing department. We're here to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions of staff at this point? Mr. Scala.
Well, I'm old enough to have been around in 2005 on the Planning and Zoning Commission when this first started, and then again in 2008 when we proceeded with this, and it's always been relatively controversial. It's one of the reasons why it was kind of punted and took so long to develop. My question is this. There has been some controversy surrounding the idea of the difference between low water bridges and span bridges. And we had some experience with that on 63 for the Moon Valley Bridge because of contracting and so on and so forth. But we've had some considerable success with that in terms of the Grindstone Trail with the low water bridges. Care to expand on that and what the differences are and what that means in terms of not only expense but also the process necessary to get those approvals, because as I understand it, low water bridges require other state approval and so on, because it might be a time factor, but also in terms of how these structures function.
I think if we could put in a low water bridge, that's obviously a lot more economical for us. A lot of people don't like them though because they're a little bit more environmentally dangerous to the creek, hazardous I should say. People use it for canoes. MDC doesn't like it as much because we have to make sure we have enough fish access through the bridges, enough tunnels. But in this case, we have tall banks. So a low water crossing just wouldn't fit. And I think, Allison, if you have anything, might add more from the engineering side of it. But that's just our experience. If we can do a low water, we try to, but this is just, you have high banks on both sides.
It's a high bank as well, just trying to get up to the other side.
Mr. Pitzer.
Yeah, you're proposing a concrete trail, right?
Yes.
What is the difference in the effect on the Hinkson with a concrete versus a permeable surface, for instance?
In our experience is that, you look at the Bear Creek Trail. The Bear Creek Trail is a gravel trail. Every time it floods, that gravel washes off into the creek. We got to go back in with quarry rock and restore it. So in this case, if we were to put this in a gravel trail and it floods out and we lose the gravel, we'd have to be coming down with gravel trucks to repair it, and just the economic, the cost of that is something. Generally, a major flood in Columbia cost us, we have to go back in and repair the trails, could it be $30,000 to $60,000 just for the existing trails we have. We find the square foot of this is so minimal, comparatively speaking, that the runoff is not going to be such, and we will improve the site. You saw the photos of the site. We can make it. We could collect stormwater. We can do some plantings and things that would help with that. Kind of like what we did at Plant Branch along that whole corridor there.
Right, and generally, is the trail going to run within that 50 or 100-foot buffer of the creek? Or
The only time
further
it'll
out?
vary is when we have to go to the bridges. When we have to cross over the bridges, it'll come out of that.
All right, and then like when we go up to tie into Bluffdale Drive on the east, and then when it crosses, it will go through the university property there to tie into Rollins Road.
And I might add that university has reviewed the easements, and they've agreed to the easements, and I'd hoped we would have had the signed easements by now.
In terms of the other easements, how many are willing sellers versus forced negotiation, condemnation?
We haven't gotten that far in the negotiations yet because
From your sense of the stakeholder meetings, how many are willing sellers?
I honestly don't know.
I've talked to two of the three, the apartment complex. They see it as a benefit, obviously, so they're helpful, I think. The other one is I've talked to the son, the Kevin Altus. He's aware of it. That is in a trust managed by an attorney, so he quickly defers to the attorney. So I think that.
How much of that easement is in addition to what we already may have with the sewer easement?
The sewer easement is for utility, for sewer only. We have to get a trail easement to put the trail on.
On
So it
top
would be
of
like
that
an easement on
existing.
top of an easement, basically.
Would be a layer, like there's a gas easement on top of a sewer easement, and our trail would be a trail easement on top of
Like a
that.
CID on top of a CID on top of a TIF, right. In terms of your funding sources, Trail 1 is all
Forget about the
it's all
non-motorized.
forget about federal, all completely 100% federal funds. Okay. And on the Trail 3, has that been, that's all park
Correct.
funds, voter approved? Okay. And this project was on that list of
No,
projects?
this was not.
Or the trail master plan?
This was in the Trails Master Plan. This was a
Okay.
project that was not identified in the 15, but this is the 2010 park sales tax.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions at this point?
Careful consideration.
Councilman Hoppy, welcome home.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Hoppy. I live at 607 Bluffdale. As the mayor mentioned, I served on the council for 9 years, up to April 2015 for the 6th Ward. And this trail configuration, these trails came before me twice while I was on council. So it's been long waiting. The first time it came before council, I voted against it. And those were because of environmental concerns and routing concerns. And after that vote, I gathered a variety of people from all the different neighborhoods of the 6th Ward to look at alternative routes to see if there were better, more environmentally sensitive routes. There were people from Shepherd, from East Campus, from Bluffdale, from Valley View, from East Point, and Miss Peters was on several of our expeditions for East Campus. And we looked at even the route that was brought up by the opposition on Old 63, and there were problems with those. And so we were diligently working for really a year on looking at alternative routes or more environmentally friendly routes. And the other thing we did during that time was meet with Gary Ward of the university and to see if there was a way that the trail could go on the university instead of on Clyde Wilson Park, which would really severely impact a lot of mature trees in that historic park. And we successfully met with Gary Ward, and tonight you have a proposal that completely stays out of Clyde Wilson Park, formerly Rock Hill Park. And so there were a lot of benefits, and so when doing those inquiries and doing that work, and so when it came before me in 2015, I voted enthusiastically yes for this trail system. And since then, many people, both in the Bluffdale neighborhood, in the 6th Ward, and around the city, have been asking me, what's taking so long? When is the trail coming? So this has been a long time coming. Having a trail that people can bike and walk on is environmentally friendly, and it's good for public health. My daughter lives at the end of Bluffdale where the trail alignment 1 will begin. She's very enthusiastic, and her husband, as well as other neighbors down there waiting for the trail to come in. They're here in the annex looking on video, I think. So I would just say that this has been a long time coming. It's been looked at, analyzed. I think we've got the most positive environmental configurations that are possible, and I urge you strongly to vote for this and the subsequent ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppe. Some people to nature that wouldn't otherwise get there.
I appreciate that. We want them to be there. It's not Sutu's forest, and there is accessibility there. There's a wonderful road that goes in. We want to organize volunteer SUVs, vans to go and pick up children in various sites of the city, and I know that there are a lot of people here who try to take care of and educate children to bring them into the wilderness, and it's right there. It's right here.
But
on the east side.
if this trail would go through tonight and keep your grass paths there and give people an opportunity to wander off that path or off that trail and into some of that path, and maybe we could get the Parks Department to identify some trees and some birds and what to look for to help that very nature school that you're envisioning.
Yes.
Is that a start?
Can we not have concrete and bridges? But I love your idea, and I don't want to say no to it.
Is your school a virtual school, or is it a place? I mean, is it like a physical place?
Is there a building?
Yeah.
We don't want to do that because that's going to interrupt the residents who live there.
Okay.
We want to make it as costless as possible, and we want to have qualified people like Lynn Hooper guide the tours of all the areas and have it flexible and moving around and introduce people to this area to come to it. It's for us, and let's share it with the residents who have lived there for many, many hundreds of years. We need them.
Thanks for all your time and passion on this. I know this is very dear to you.
I appreciate that so much, Mayor Treese, and all of you. You've listened generously to me and to my colleagues, and I want to be friends with everybody when we walk out of the room tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
Any further public comment? Mr. Clark, good evening.
Hi there, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well.
Somebody left a nice G2 pen. My name's John Clark, I live at 403 North 9th Street. And actually, I want to start by following up on exactly what this man said. Folks, the non-motorized transportation demonstration project, Get About stuff, was not about recreational trails. It was not about seeing nature. The 30-mile vision around Columbia is about recreation. It's about amenity. It's not about what that money was spent for. We misspent so much of it and did not get enough benefit out of it, basically to address the needs to create significant mode shift, getting people out of their cars and walking to work, biking to work, this kind of stuff. Actually, recreation is not a necessity in that kind of sense. Basically, the people who use the trails for recreation, I believe, when they go home, they drive to work in their cars. They drive to school in their cars. They drive to shop in their cars. I do not believe we've had that much mode shift from this kind of thing. So my first notion is simply that this 30 miles, which by the way already has that hole completed with the Shepherd Boulevard, and if you cannot do something about the 100 yards on Stadium, we've hung walking pads and so forth off of bridges to go over highways. We can make that section there easily safe and make that particular thing function. Probably the better thing is that for this $2.3 million, there are so many better uses. I call attention to what was said at the budget stuff by you and by the city manager. We're out of money. We need more revenue. Our funds are in bad shape. To spend the last bit of the get-about money, frankly, once again, south of Broadway as opposed to Ward 1, Ward 2, and Ward 3, is really to waste it. We're not going to get more money like that again. Parks and Rec has run out of money. We have grown 60% in 25 years. Our bonded debt has gone up 9.18 times on that. We don't have money. They don't have money. Building something new that we're going to have to take care of with money they don't have because our sales tax revenue and so forth is just very bad policy. I encourage you to reject this, and particularly I encourage you, and I particularly encourage Ms. Peters to, at the end of the discussion tonight, ask for a vote on this to be tabled until the next meeting, because we've requested from the Finance Department a list of the project expenditures and operating expenses for 10 years of this project. Until we analyze that, we really cannot meaningfully analyze the equities they use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Should I take this person's pen?
Probably leave it right there in case someone needs it.
Is it your pen? Is it yours? It's yours too? Good. I can take that back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Schuler.
My name is Barbara Wren. I live at 615 Bluffdale Drive, and I want to talk about how this trail is not necessary. I was here I was in the other city council chambers in 1995, and city council voted that this trail was not a necessity. I was here in 2008. The city council voted 6-1 that this trail was not necessary. It's still not necessary. Some people may think it's going to be wonderful recreation. Well, it's not supposed to be for recreation. It's supposed to be spent for transportation projects. Option one. The other part is parks. $13.5 million has been spent on parks and trails in a 1-mile radius of the Bluffdale cul-de-sac. Is that equity in the city? $13.5 million on parks and trails in a 1-mile radius of the start of this trail. Now we're talking another $2.5 million. So that would be like $16 million spent in our tiny little neighborhood, a 1-mile radius. There needs to be sidewalks and things in other parts of town. We're told that this trail is needed to complete a loop. That was why people's yards were torn up and wide sidewalks were put on the old 63. The old 63 pedway was supposed to be the compromise between putting the trail down in Bluffdale, and that 2 city councils prior voted no. So they went ahead and did the old 63 pedway. I'm told that that is a hell of a hill. The other day, I went up and down it 3 times in an hour, and I'm still here to tell you about it. We're just used to the hill in the neighborhood. I see people pushing strollers and biking and little kids on bikes. They haven't got the memo that it's the biggest hill in Columbia. Now, you try to ride a bike from Stadium to Grindstone Parkway on Old 63, that's a whole nother story. The loop was completed when this was built with get-about funds. It's walkable, bikeable. I'm told it's not compliant because it follows a roadway, but it's definitely accessible because my friends have used it. Every one of you have needs in your ward that are greater than this. It's like saying your kids are barefoot and they need shoes, but you have the money to go buy an iPhone 10. No, buy shoes for your kids, use the phone you got, and then go out and buy the iPhone 10 when you get more money. Sure, you guys are going to be out some consulting fees if you voted no tonight, but you guys pay for consulting fees all the time. I wanted to address something that Mike Grigg said about the gravel. Maybe the Parks Department needs to go down and do a study in the floodplain and find out why this gravel road does not wash when the creek floods, because it has healed for 38 years. And there's no problem. When the creek floods, there's no problem. The gravel does not go into the creek. It's an established riparian forest. Now, on the other side, the west side, that may have been a dump site, and that's why Stadium Boulevard was built, because they could not put Rollins Road across because it was shale and a dump site. It was not stable to put a road there. But on the other side was a dairy farm, and it's turning into a forest. It's a natural progression of nature. And sure, there's bush honeysuckle. We all have bush honeysuckle in our yards if you let it grow. That can be dealt with later. So I ask that you look at this trail. It's more of a luxury, not a necessity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public hearing on Public Hearing 3-18. Is there any council discussion on Bill 27-18? Mr. Trapp,
Could I have a question?
you may have a question.
Mr. Griggs, would you comment on the bridge and what kind of impact that would have? And we've heard about the...
Well, our two bridges are, one's like 167, the other one's roughly 190 feet, so our two are smaller. I think the one they're talking about is the Get About Bridge.
Oh, please. Could you talk about what kind of impacts the bridges might have, or what's the planning going into that?
John Zimmerman with Trans Systems. The bridges on the Alignment 1 have two separate spans. They're 165 foot each, so 330 foot total. And we sited those to avoid mature trees on the west bank. And on the east bank, we lined it up with the connection point with Alignment 3.
So it's two 165-foot bridges?
Correct.
The change in elevation from one end to the other?
Well, I've got those. It'll go up from the top of the west bank to the about 10 feet off the lower floodway, and it's on a 4.9% grade to meet ADA. About 15 feet in elevation difference.
Over 265-foot run. Alan?
Yeah, this may not be directed to you. I don't think you were involved, or you can correct me if you were, with the span that was the Moon Valley Bridge that was it was contracted out, I believe, to a company in Jefferson City, wasn't it, at the time? This was a few years back. It was one of my field trips to this area, given that the span was put in place and there was considerable activity in the area and lack of oversight, if you will. And there were even some citations for owl habitat and a few other things. You weren't involved in that project?
No, that was a separate project, separate company.
Okay. And that got to the question that I was asking you in terms of providing the kind of equipment that's necessary to get a span bridge into a long-distance span. I mean, they not only have to accommodate the span, but they also have to accommodate the equipment that puts the bridge in place.
Correct.
Question. So it wasn't to you. I didn't know whether you were
Okay.
involved in that or not.
for an answer? Did you get the answer?
Yeah, I didn't really ask a question, so that was...
All right. Any further comment, Council?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Thomas?
So I really
I think we're good.
appreciate the tremendous public interest in this important issue, and it's one that we have been discussing for many, many years. To me, we have to look at the overriding purpose of the non-motorized transportation pilot program grant, known here in Columbia as Get About Columbia. It is to create a culture change in the way we move around our communities. It's part of a national program, and it's been a long time. It was 2005 that the United States Congress approved this funding, which came to Columbia and 3 other communities. These are probably about the last funds from that program. And the experiment has been extremely successful. We've seen enormous increases in bicycling and walking in our community as we've expanded various different infrastructure components of this system, trails and sidewalks and slowing down traffic at intersections, crosswalks, and improving safety and access and desirability for walking and bicycling. This trail, as has been pointed out by a couple of people, but I think it needs to be emphasized, will provide tremendous commuting access to campus and downtown from East Columbia, access that just doesn't exist at the moment. There are literally dozens of student apartment complexes down south on Old 63 that will now be able to use that pedway, get on the trail, cross the Hinkson Creek, go straight up to Rollins Road and onto campus and onto downtown. There's a very large apartment complex on Broadway called Broadway Village Apartments, which will now be connected through I think it's called Moon Valley Trail, and then under Old 63 and up through the Bluffdale neighborhood onto the new trail and up to campus. Potential for thousands of trips per day to be converted from cars and buses to biking or walking, which is the exact purpose of the non-motorized transportation pilot program. I disagree with people who say that the non-motorized transportation pilot program is not about recreation. It's been well documented. In fact, it was really in the whole theory that went behind the development in the United States Congress of the non-motorized transportation pilot program that people come to bicycle commuting by being initially recreational bicyclists. So building out our trail system, encouraging, enticing more people to get on bikes and to get out walking longer distances in our natural environment is a step on the way to promoting people to become more regular active transportation users. So by connecting that trail along the creek corridor at creek level and avoiding the hill and being part of our magnificent plan for a 30-mile loop is absolutely consistent with the goals of the non-motorized transportation pilot program. So I want to just respond to a few of the arguments against this. We are not losing a piece of beautiful wilderness if we build this trail through here. We are going to open it up to more people. Children from all over the city will be able to ride their bikes safely to the wilderness. Last Child in the Wilderness. Sutu, thank you so much for giving me that book. I had already read it, but I've now given it to a friend who's not read it. It's a very important issue that children do not get out in nature. And by having a safe bicycle trail network throughout our city that goes through nature areas, we will enable that to happen. The alternative routes are really, really remarkable in their inappropriateness. I have biked from the intersection of Stadium and Old 63 up to Ashland Road and up there, and it is not a nice experience at all, and I'm a very experienced cyclist. There is a stripe of paint now, which was not there until several years ago, but you cannot rely on vehicles to stay there. They're moving at 40, 50 miles an hour. They're just a few feet from your left elbow, and to the right is a relatively low parapet and a big drop to the Hinkson Creek below. And that's the same for pedestrians and cyclists. Nobody is going to take up walking or bicycling to university or to their jobs if that's the route they have to take. I also want to emphasize that we've gone through this process several times, and there has been overwhelming public support for it every time, as well as support for from our commissions. 5 of our advisory commissions have endorsed this project and continue to. It seems to me a fairly straightforward vote that we have to make to approve the plans, that these do conform to what was agreed, I guess 3 years ago now, and ask the staff to move ahead with the final design and acquiring the easements to build this trail system.
Thank you. Any further council comment? Ms. Peters, it's in your ward.
It is definitely in my ward, and I've definitely heard from a lot of people. I also like to thank everyone for coming out and being part of this public hearing. You know, in 2015, I know this has been going on for a long time, but in 2015 we voted to go with option 1 and option 3. And then I know there was some question about whether the Get About funds could be used for option 1, whether it actually met the criteria. And I believe it took like an extra year with 3 different inquiries to the federal government to make sure that this did actually meet the Get About funds requirements to be used. I've certainly seen all of the robo emails, if you want to put it that way, plus a lot of just personal emails from a number of people both at Bluff Creek, up in the Shepherd Boulevard area, Valley View, and down near Bluffdale. Most of them supportive of the trail. Certainly we have a very vocal and passionate group of people that are opposed to the trail. And I'm sorry that you're not happy to have the trail, but hopefully you'll be happier once it's in. To me, this seems like all we're doing, we don't need to decide on the trail alignments tonight. We've already done that. We just need to move forward and ask the city and the Parks and Rec people to put this out for bids and make sure that it is going to fall within the money that we have available.
Any further comments?
One question.
Mr. Ruck.
Just for Mr. Griggs. Since we've been working on this for so many years, what is the timeline? If it is approved tonight, what is the projected timeline?
I believe we'd go out for bids this summer with maybe construction starting later in the fall. Is that for your side?
Yes.
How long will it take to complete?
About a year, would you say, John, for our part?
And we'd have to work around the season, of course, following all the federal regulations about not doing it, where the bats are hibernating and things like that. We have to kind of work with that. So, it depends on what we find once we get out there and start setting up and getting ready to do it.
And Mr. Griggs, in terms of involving some of the neighborhood and the stakeholders here with some of the remediation and the tree planting, any objection to that? I know you did that on the Flat Branch
We
relief.
have reached out and made that offer. We glad to continue with that and work with them on plannings and where things should go and all that, absolutely.
And some of the interpretive suggestions that I made in terms of jump-starting that school and some of the education with respect to the trees and birds that may be encountered on that trailhead. Is that something you all can do?
We certainly can, yes. We'd like to. We certainly would make that offer and work with them on that, because I think it is important to recognize that impact of what people will see when they ride through the trail, and especially some of the more significant sycamores and some of the other trees that are there. And, just learning about it as they go by will be good.
Any final comment, Mr. Scally?
Yeah, I'm not going to try and take too much time, and I'll try and stay out of the weeds, pun intended, I guess. But
that's later on.
Yes. But I've been here a while. I started out, I guess it was in planning and zoning in 2005 when this first came through. Darwin Heineman was the mayor at that time. And I was around for all of these votes. The 2008 vote, as I recall, had a lot to do with trying to spend $13.5 million of Get About funds, figuring out which projects were prioritized. At the end of that meeting, we spent the $13.5 million worth of funding. We stayed away from the Shepherds to Rollins connection because it was relatively controversial even then. That was 2008. And the conversation was that we didn't exactly know where we were going to get some more money. There were certain other trails that needed to be completed and so on. One of the ones that was supposedly next in line, or at least is equivalent to this Shepherd to Rollins trail, was the Colt Railroad Trail, the one that went up Paris Road to service the entire north part of town. It was right on the kind of the border between the 2nd and the 3rd wards. And I think, I'm not sure it was Chris Yanko at the time, but it might have been Thorne. I'm not sure. I think he was the 2nd Ward Councilman at the time. We all thought that was a good idea, and including, to his credit, Darwin Heinlein also thought that was a good idea. But anyway, this trail issue was kind of punted. It kind of resurfaced again in 2015. I think some folks have indicated that that there was a 6-1 vote in 2015. I was the one vote that voted against it. I did that not because I'm not a fan of trails. God knows we have the Hominy Creek Trail now. It's the only one that goes underneath I-70 in the state. I mean, it's a wonderful trail. Goes all the way through Woodridge, connects with Grindstone, goes all the way through to Stevens Lake. I mean, there's lots of good stuff going on with lots of these trails. But to try and keep the and just to mention this, I mean, we've been overwhelmed. There's a lot of my friends out here that I know, and I'm going to irritate some folks. I have a knack for doing that sometimes, but I've probably got 350 emails, and just in favor of this. But almost every one of those 350 emails came through a group called Salsa Labs, and there were two subject lines. One was vote yes on the Shepherd to Rollins Trail, and the other was please support the Shepherd to Rollins Trail. And the text was all the same. I mean, I assume this is on the PedNet website that people could, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I've done the same thing for petitions and so on. Sometimes they give you a little bit more leeway and they let you customize the comments or whatever. But at any rate, and then I probably got, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 in opposition. Nearly all of those were handwritten, or at least emailed. I mean, it didn't appear that they were generated. But regardless, I appreciate the input from all the folks and all the enthusiasm here. What I am convinced by, and one of the reasons, several reasons for my vote, one is consistency. I always thought that the option 4, at least in the short term, was a less expensive option, would serve at least for a pilot to find out what was going to happen, and we could always add to it. But the comments that resonate for me the most had to be the Schuler's comments, both Diane and Greg, who were talking about the costs of this. Now it's $2.3 million, I expect, and perhaps even more importantly than the cost, because we're facing some interesting times with the sales tax revenues down and so on and so forth. And we still have to decide where to maximize the benefit. Ultimately, our job here comes to the point of what's in the best community interest. And I would maintain that there are some other trails that will be neglected, maybe never get built, including that Colt Railroad Trail, if we don't think about what we're doing here. But the other thing that makes a lot of sense to me is the essence of our strategic plan. Our strategic plan says social equity. I mean, it has all kinds of equity in it. It has infrastructure equity, it has racial equity, it has all kinds of equities. It's a centerpiece of how we see ourselves and where we're going. And these numbers about spending 13 or 14 or 16 million dollars in a very small area here in one place, to me, in a sense, kind of violate that contract, that strategic plan. And I'm not just proposing, I mean, developments in my neighborhood. I'm just thinking that we can start to make some compromises. God knows we make some compromises on incomplete streets or complete streets, depending on where we are in this city. We can do the same thing with potential solutions, or at least temporary solutions, with things like option 4 rather than the build out of this options 1 and 3. But for those reasons, primarily the equity reason and the expense reason, I'm going to vote no on this proposal.
Seeing no further public comment, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll on Bill 27-18?
Council Bill 2718, Mr. Ruffin?
Yes.
Mr. Trapp?
Yes.
Mr. Scala?
No.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Pitzer?
Yes.
Ms. Peters?
Yes.
Mr. Treese?
Aye. And is there any further council discussion on Bill 28-18, authorizing the acquisition of certain interests in real property for construction of the trail you just approved? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Council Bill 2818, Mr. Ruffin.
Yes.
Mr. Trapp.
Yes.
Mr. Scala.
No.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Pitzer.
Yes.
Ms. Peters.
Yes.
Mr. Treese.
Aye. And